Hello there, listening audience. This is Michael Cross here with another episode of Unlock Door Radio, where we like to ask the questions that are rarely asked in mainstream media. Tonight, we have a really special guest. Her name's Robin Gerber, and among other things, whether it be motivational speaking or writing books, I was caught by a book that she wrote a couple years ago called Barbie and Ruth. And the interesting thing is that, the Barbie doll is essentially a part of Americana, like Norman Rockwell or apple pie, but it's not always been that way. And so let's find out what happened to make it such a huge phenomenon. Hello, Robin.
Hello. Good morning.
Yeah. So, tell me a little bit about your book. It deals not just with the Barbie doll, but also the marketing strategies.
Yes, well, actually, it is the first biography of a woman named Ruth Handler, who should be better known than she is. But Ruth Handler, who was the child of immigrants to America, she actually founded the company Mattel Toys. Her husband was the designer, and she was the marketing person and the CEO. And they started that company in 1945, right after the war. Most of the toys they made were musical toys, guns, that kind of thing in the 40s and 50s. But Ruth had one idea for a doll. And she wanted them to make this doll. The men in the design department thought it was a very bad idea, but she said, I want an adult doll. Little girls don't have adult dolls. They only have baby dolls. And they really need a doll to help them play as if they were adult women. And she noticed this because she watched her daughter play and saw how much the little girls wanted to play at being big girls. So she asked the men to design this doll. They absolutely couldn't figure it out. They said no mother would buy her daughter a doll with breasts, and so they refused to make this doll. But finally, in the late 50s, she went on a trip to Europe and saw a doll similar to what you think of as a Barbie doll, which Barbie, of course, is a global phenomenon. And she saw this doll called the Lily doll in Germany. It had originally started life as a sex toy. And she said, this is the doll I want to make for little girls in America. She bought several of the dolls and brought them back and ordered the engineering department to make a doll very similar to that doll. And that's how Barbie was first made.
Okay, it sounds like she was a real go-getter, kind of a, we see these shows, like my wife loves the TV series Mad Men. So this is kind of that same era then.
Yes, it's exactly the same era because she was developing the doll in the late 1950s, precisely the same time. And while she had her design department over in Japan, which is where the manufacturing was happening, she had them over there designing this little plastic doll, and plastics were still being developed, so it was not easy at that time to make plastics that were very tiny and well designed. So that was happening in Japan. She was having the little clothes made, handmade by women, Japanese women who were actually working in sweatshop kind of conditions, I'm afraid. But she had another problem, which was, what if the men were right? What if mothers wouldn't buy their daughters dolls with breasts? She was quite concerned about whether this doll would actually sell. It was her baby, after all. It was the only toy she ever came up with. So she had an idea to hire one of these newfangled psychologists who marketed themselves as marketing people. And so she found this man, Ernest Dichter. Now, he himself had come from Germany, and he'd studied with Freud. And he brought these ideas to America and had the very entrepreneurial idea himself that rather than treating individual patients, he could help corporations sell their products through psychology. And he was getting quite well known for this. In fact, in a way, he was notorious because there was a real backlash against this idea that you manipulate people's emotions in order to sell products. But nevertheless, Ruth hired him, and he started doing focus groups. we're very familiar with those now, but back then that was quite a revolutionary idea. And so he brought a bunch of mothers in with daughters and said, here's this doll. What could encourage you to buy this doll? And figured out that what mothers were really concerned about was their daughters' hygiene. And, they wanted their daughters to care about how they look. And in fact, Mad Men's a good example. If any of your listeners watch that show, the mother who's married to the main character is very much concerned about how her daughter looks. And so Ernest Dichter came back to Ruth Handler and said, you should market this doll as a fashion model. Because after all, fashion models always care about how they look, and they're well-groomed. And this way, the mothers will feel like they're doing something good for their daughters by buying them this doll that will encourage them in their good grooming habits. So that was how she did end up marketing the doll.
Okay. For our listening audience, I encourage people to look up something about Ernest Dichter because he was actually quite influential. I mean, he's even the one responsible for the shape of lipstick applicators, isn't he?
Yes, the idea that shaping lipstick in a phallic-looking sort of container would subliminally, or perhaps not so subliminally, encourage women to buy it. So he did similar things with the design of cars and the marketing of cars. So market cars is something that was sexually connected and would make you a more attractive man to women if you bought this car. So he really changed the discussion about products from the utility of a product to the emotional viability of a product, the way in which it could make you feel better. Mm-hmm. Buy this and it'll make you happier. Buy this and it'll make you feel better. We're so familiar with this now, it doesn't even sound like a big deal, but at the time it was really quite revolutionary to stop marketing a product for its utility.
Yeah.
So, in fact, the book, Vance Packard's book, The Hidden Persuaders, which came out around this time, or maybe it might have been the early 60s, that was a reaction to Dichter himself and others like him who were seen as nefarious in the way that they were promoting products, not as the product, but as something that would, help you psychologically.
Yeah, it's really amazing that, he was a student of Freud, and then Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, they're the ones that kind of got all this modern day marketing going, but poor Freud, he hardly, he barely had enough to kind of survive on throughout his years. He never was rich. Whereas he made a lot of other people.
This made Dichter was a rich man. Absolutely. This corporations had money to spend, and once they saw that this was something that was working, he was quite in demand. Ruth didn't discover him. He had already been discovered. But the fact that she used him was indicative of the kind of entrepreneur she was. She was very forward-thinking.
Well, I read one article that said that originally even fathers were a little bit hesitant to buy such an anatomically correct doll. And they, too, went into the idea that this doll could help their daughters learn how to dress right, groom right, and then be able to find Mr. Right someday and get married. This being the 1950s.
Yeah.
And
in fact, that very first television commercial for the Barbie doll, which you can see online if you look up Barbie doll first commercial, has her in a wedding dress getting married. It shows her in different outfits, but with a wonderful song in the background about how beautiful she is. And then in one of the transitions, she is wearing a wedding dress. So the message isn't terribly subtle. Now, what's interesting is that when Ruth unveiled this doll, all new toys are unveiled at something called Toy Fair, which happens in March in New York. And the toys are put on display, and in those days, the big buyers, which Sears was the biggest, they would come and look at the toys and order what they wanted. And the Barbie doll was completely ignored. She had virtually no orders at Toy Fair, and she was devastated. She went into her hotel room and cried, which is not something she did very often. And then she called Japan and stopped production because she was sure that she had made a huge mistake. And this was going to cost her a lot of money. But the ads started running after March, and little girls were watching the ads. And then come the end of May, beginning of June, school is out, children want toys to play with for the summer, and suddenly the Barbie doll started flying off the shelves, and that first year they sold 300,000 dolls. So I think it really proved that Victor's ads were the powerful engine, because the male buyers at Toy Fair did not get it at all. They did not see the toy would sell.
Well, this gets into kind of that Freudian thing because you know you get people ranging from some feminist to some church groups, and I've even heard something about like groups in Iran who have said that while the Barbie doll is too explicit and it's too grown up and that little girls are being brainwashed, but my understanding is that what appealed to girls was like this subconscious desire that Dichter noticed too, that they had a desire to be more grown up, that if the dolls had just been a replica of what had been coming along ever since then, it's not appealing to their vision of themselves 10 or 15 years down the road. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, Ruth nailed it, as we say. She said, little girls just want to play at being big girls. And I've done many, many interviews about the book, and people have called in and only a handful say, the body image thing is a problem. By far, people call in and say, I loved my Barbie doll because I could pretend to be anything I wanted. I really wanted to be an engineer. I really wanted to be, an artist, whatever it was. I could pretend to be that with this adult doll. With a baby doll, there's only one thing to do: take care of the baby. And there's only one role, the mother role. So Ruth saw that this had what she called play value, and Mattel was all about creating toys that had play value, meaning a continuing ability for the child to play with it. And, of course, Barbie was kind of the ultimate creation in that way, because there's still 3 dolls sold every 2 seconds or something.
Mm-hmm. Where did Ken come into all this?
Well, after the doll came out, they started getting letters saying, we want her to have a boyfriend. She was a real adult doll, and one of the things the girls were thinking about was, well, if she's a teenage fashion model, she'd have a boyfriend. So that's how they created Ken.
Okay. But since it was America, they couldn't make him quite as anatomically correct.
Yeah, that was a pretty big debate. And it was quite a devastating one for the real Ken, who was her son. Her children were named Barbara and Ken. And to this day, Barbara, who's still alive, she's the only one still alive, does not like to be called Barbie. She only wants to be called Barbara because she found having the doll named after her, she didn't find that very pleasant. And Ken, even less so, because he was even more upset by it because of the teasing, as you can imagine, that he got from the fact that Ken has no anatomy.
Yeah.
In the crucial places, he's just neutered.
Oh, poor Ken. Yeah, but of course this was around 1960, 61. There's Barbie.
Yeah, it was early 60s, and yeah, I guess it was okay to have breasts, but a penis was a step too far. So.
Okay. Hey, in our remaining, I know you're busy today, and our remaining few minutes, do you think that, I've heard people make comments that maybe this is, in some way, it's bad for girls in their psychology. They see this image of what they see as maybe Barbie as being the perfect woman. you must have come across lots of research. What do you think about that?
I just think it's not true. They didn't. The doll wasn't really, from what I can tell, the doll for little girls, myself included, by the way. I was born in '52, so I played with Barbie dolls. That most girls didn't see the doll as an extension or as separate from themselves. And this is some ideal separate from me. And it was kind of the opposite. It was, this doll is me. And this is who I'm going to be. And the anatomy of it was rather irrelevant. I don't remember having any thoughts, and I haven't talked to anyone or seen any research that, I haven't seen any good research that showed that this somehow creates some kind of pathology or psychological damage in girls. I think, Ruth was asked this question because she lived till 2002, so this came up for her quite a bit, as you can imagine. And, she was very dismissive of this. She said, this is not a problem in a girl that's going to be created by a doll. If a girl has a bad body image, that has to do with her parenting and, how her parents deal with that. And to me, that's the truth. If you're telling your daughter, as I did mine, that she's beautiful and she's fine and she's perfect the way she is, playing with a doll that's different from her is not going to matter.
Okay.
So that's what I believe. I mean, other people certainly believe strongly another way, but I have not seen any good research. I don't know if you found any.
Well, no, I actually haven't. Hey,
yeah.
How can people find out more about you? You have a website?
I do. It's Robin, R-O-B-I-N, like the bird. Robin Gerber, like the baby food, .com. RobinGerber.com.
Okay, and they can find out more about your speaking as well as your books and that sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, the book itself and Ruth Handler's story is being considered for a movie right now, so excited about that, and I hope it happens so more people can learn about her, because she was a tremendous character, an amazing corporate executive, and she had a very dramatic story.
All right. Sounds like she was a real entrepreneur. Okay, well,
yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with my audience.
You're very welcome.
Okay, well, you have a good day now.
Okay, all right, take care. Thanks.
Bye.
Hello, and welcome back to the second half of Unlock the Door Radio. That was a very interesting conversation I had with the author of Barbie and Ruth. And I think ultimately it shows that our society is very much driven by marketing. In fact, it could be said that those who control the message control the mind of the masses. Now, that doesn't mean everyone. I'm not going to say that every single person in the United States, or for that matter in the Western world, is entirely controlled by the marketing message. However, most people don't really see through it. In fact, if you take a look at how many hours the average person spends watching TV in a country such as the United States or Britain, for instance, it's something like around 5 hours a night that people spend watching TV. Now, that's on average. Now, multiply that times 7 for a week, then multiply that times 52 for get an approximation on how many hours or even how many months, if a person were to live continuously, that they're actually watching TV. And then you wonder, why isn't it that curriculums in schools don't include something about being able to be analytical when it comes to marketing, when people are able to see how things are presented to them? Because ultimately, we're all consumers. We can't help that. I don't care if you live out in the middle of the Yukon and you're trying to be self-sufficient. Once in a while, you're going to have to come in to a trading post or whatever, and you're going to have to buy something. So ultimately, we all are consumers, and we should be aware of a lot of the tactics that are used to get us to buy things. Now, what I'd like to do is go over a few of these things and perhaps add some commentary on the manipulation strategies. Now, first of all, just to show you the power of the media when it comes even to things that aren't really marketing, well, actually, everything's marketing, isn't it? I mean, political ideas are marketing. You're trying to persuade people to vote for you based on one thing or another. Information in and of itself is very much marketing. I mean, take a look in the United States. In the United States, you had the situation where Edward Snowden, the famous whistleblower, he wanted to get a discussion going on the surveillance state. Now, the interesting thing is that if you can go by recent surveys, Snowden is looked at unfavorably by most Americans. But yet, if you poll people outside of the United States, particularly in Western Europe, you find that he's considered a hero. Now, why would there be a difference? Well, I think that's pretty evident to see that if you look at the way the American media presented Edward Snowden and how they pretty much made him out to be in some way unpatriotic, then ultimately people in America are going to see him unfavorably. However, people in other countries, and I'd even say like countries like Germany, and particularly East Germany, where they used to be really heavily controlled by Stasi, when it was a communist government, they're a little bit, scared of things when it comes to the state having too much power. And so when they see these stories in their own press in which it's a little bit less biased against Snowden and is more journalistically, you could say favorable just because of the fact that it is unbiased, the people there have a positive opinion of Snowden. Now, the thing is that if you, again, control the message, you control the mind of the person out there consuming. And it doesn't matter whether it's a bar of soap or it doesn't matter if it is a political cause or candidate. All right? And in America, there is somewhat of a false illusion of diversity in the media. I mean, you've got 6 major corporations that control just about everything that Americans hear or see in print or on the TV. And so ultimately you're going to have, it's somewhat of a oligopoly, not a monopoly. Monopoly would mean it would be all controlled by one entity. Instead, you have 6 entities. And whereas they're not publicly funded like news services such as, let's say Russia Today, RT, the difference appears to be that they're privately funded but publicly directed, in that the government knows how to work with them to get a message out. And something like RT, obviously they're going to give a certain positive image towards Russian politics, but at the same time, they seem to be fairly independent when it comes to their content, especially with things outside of Russia. So I think we should kind of get past that whole idea that we have a free media in America, because we don't. And it's becoming increasingly concentrated, except for, of course, the internet. But, they're working on that right now, believe me. So anyway, when it comes to advertising itself, though, how do the advertisers get us to buy into something? Why do they get us to part with our money? Why do they get us, excuse me for the cold here, how do they ultimately get us to feel something for a product? Because ultimately it's not rational thinking that gets us to buy things. That's an illusion. It is our emotions. What we do is we buy something, let's say a car, or we have a taste for a car, and we will try to justify it afterwards. So essentially, it's like the hypothalamus, makes the ultimate decision, but the cerebral cortex decides how to justify that decision. So you see a big car that is going to really be hard to find parking spaces in a big city if you live in a big city, and it gets poor gas mileage, and you really don't need it. But at the same time, you're going to justify it. Well, maybe I will need it someday. Who knows? Maybe I'll move to the Yukon in Alaska. Well, and then, of course, I'll have the car already. Come on, this is the way we operate. Whereas most marketers realize that there are things that people are gravitating to because of their emotions. A woman, and when it comes to psychology, there is no gender. I mean, there is definitely a gender bias. There is no such thing as completely gender neutral items. Okay, marketers know that. That's why, for instance, you market certain products on shows that you know mostly women will watch on TV, versus you'll market other products on shows that mostly men are watching. Okay, now there's exceptions to this. There really are. But ultimately, if you can bank on about 80 to 85% of your audience being one gender or another, then you're going to aim things towards that 80 to 85%. And of course, marketers know things more about us. They know what ages will gravitate towards certain programming. That's pretty evident. Watch TV. You can pretty much guess even by the music that's used in the background, or the age of the actor, the leading actor and actress, or you could say the alpha male and the alpha female in the lineup. That will give you a clue to approximately what the show is aiming for. Okay? So the thing is that marketers then can use that information to stimulate us psychologically to buy one product over another. Now, as my guest said in the earlier half of this show, Ernst Dichter was responsible in large part for the change in the shape of lipstick. Because before, for those of you who are old enough to remember, or those of you who are children and your mom still used lipstick that was looked like somewhat of a petri dish or something, or it was in a glass jar, and then they would apply it using cotton to the lips. The thing is that it wasn't until the late 50s that it started catching on to use it in a tube. And the reason they used it in a tube was because the marketers believed, now you could say whether it worked or not, whether it's true or not, the marketers believed that the tube would create a subconscious link to oral sex. The long tube, and, well, you know what it means. It's phallic symbol, okay? I don't have to spell it out. And the thing is that worked. I mean, sales went up. Now, of course, people could say, no, this just makes it easier. It makes it more efficient. Of course you're going to say that. But then you got to think about, I think it was Dichter, although I may be wrong about this, that when the cake mixes came out in the 50s and they were trying to figure out why it was that something you just add water or milk to and pop it in the oven, you have a cake, that women were saying no to it. They had to do focus groups, and they figured out that the cake and cooking represented the woman sacrificing of herself for her family. So they thought, well, why don't you put the directions, add an egg to it, which would remind them of their egg cells, and being somewhat of a vicarious sacrifice like a woman does when she gets pregnant and has children. And, you could say, oh, that sounds crazy or something like that. But you know what? That's what the marketers believed. They did it, and the sales skyrocketed. So, psychology, you can never totally prove something one way or another, but it's pretty evident that the marketers see results as being the proof. Okay? They see sales increases. Their money depends on this kind of stuff. So ultimately, yeah, you could say, well, there might have been something else involved. There could have been some other variable. Well, fine. If you could have been a marketer in those days and find out what that variable was, you'd have made a lot of money, right? And obviously, that was not the case. So therefore, we must assume that the variable that was most important was the subconscious linking to, well, base sexual desires or nurturing and so forth. Now, that gets me to some of the items and how they sell things nowadays. Now, for one thing, I think we can be pretty clear that sex sells in advertising. There was recently a big controversy over some company that ran an ad about getting yourself in shape for summer, and it showed a bikini-clad model in London. And the thing was that there were certain types of feminists. Okay, feminists come in all types. When you say feminist, we all get an image in our mind what it is, but if we have a positive view, then we get a positive image. If we have a negative view, we get a negative image. But there are certain types of feminists who do believe that if you show a skinny model in a bikini, that in some way you are devaluing people that don't have those kinds of bodies. Well, the thing is, first of all, I would say, come on, what you're aiming for is the concept that people are yearning. I don't know if there's too many women out there. Let's just focus on women before we deal with the sex appeal to men. Are there really women out there who would buy the product if you had a woman who was overweight in a bikini and advertising it? What you're trying to get people to do is trying to associate with what the results would be. And obviously, if you're going to sell something that is associated with getting yourself in shape, then you're going to show an ideal. And you're not going to show someone who's out of shape, or you're not going to make sales. Advertising is not a public service announcement. The companies are not required to have to conform to some sort of public good. They're trying to make money. Now, that may feel bad. I mean, I don't like it when alcohol ads come out and advertise alcohol and make it look fun and exciting, that sort of thing. But it's obviously not the responsibility of the alcohol producer to come out and, show the results of what happens when people drink. They're trying to entice people to buy their product. They're not trying to say, no, you can't do this. We don't force fast food restaurants to only have models that are morbidly obese. Because maybe if you eat too much of those fast foods and you don't exercise, you'll be obese. It's gonna make more sense to show people that are thin, attractive, and young, especially if you're aiming at that demographic, as eating those foods. And that will entice people to eat it as well. But anyway, when it comes to selling things, it's kind of unfair to tell advertisers that they have a public responsibility not to hurt people's feelings. You know what? What if you're a man and you have a situation in which you're not feeling particularly successful in life? You don't have your own home, you're in a dead-end job, you feel you can't really provide for your wife and children the way you want, and then advertisers come on showing, let's say, a perfume commercial aimed at women, but at the same time, the man comes in, he's driving a Rolls Royce or a Lexus or something, and he comes in and he takes his beautiful, young, attractive wife to a really expensive restaurant that, would cost you maybe a month's salary. I don't know. And, does the advertiser really have to show regular people in regular situations going to a taco stand or something because he can't afford to take their wife out on their anniversary to an exclusive restaurant in Paris? No. So ultimately, advertising does create a false image. But ultimately, a lot of times they do use sex to sell their products. Okay, if you go to Latin America, you'll see lots of ads showing blonde, skinny girls in bikinis selling, and associating that with alcohol. Even though you don't see that many blonde, skinny girls in bikinis on the beaches in those countries because the population doesn't look like that. But yet, that's the ads you show. I was kind of surprised the last time I was in China. So many ads showing white models in advertising. And ultimately, it's because the Chinese seem to want not so much to be white, to transform themselves genetically, but they want the image that they see of the Western world. They want the wealth and stability and all those other things. So they use those kinds of ads. Now, if you're trying to sell stuff to young males who, I don't know, they don't have much money yet, they're going to college or something like that, then of course you're going to use sex appeal to sell them products such as beer. Because then they will feel like they'll get a reaction to it. Some people would actually say there's a biochemical reaction. If a person sees a sexy ad, their minds will react to it, even though they know it's not real. In the same way a person could look at a pornographic image and all of a sudden their minds will react as if that's a real person or persons in front of them, even though their cerebral cortex absolutely knows that that is just an... So ultimately, when excuse me again. So ultimately, you have to say that the subconscious mind is really not that intelligent. Okay? But it will react. So you get a reaction when you see the ad. You forget all about the commercial you see. You go into a store, you see the product, and perhaps subconsciously there's still a connection because, a connection was made when you saw the product originally associated with sex appeal, and you're more likely to buy it. I've always thought it was kind of interesting how taboo could be used for selling products. I've run across so many ads. I remember this one ad, it showed a car parked and then it showed a couple laying on the couch, but there's lots of covers on the couch. So you can't, it's a large couch and you can't really tell, all the contents. And if you first look at it, your idea is that there's a guy and a girl on the couch. But in this ad, I noticed something about the feet. The feet didn't line up right. And ultimately, there were what seemed to be female feet from going in directions that would have been impossible unless there was a second female on the couch with the guy. Now, something like that, I don't know, maybe it was just part of the photoshopping that they messed up on, or maybe it was to kind of catch your subconscious mind into paying attention to that ad. That there's a threesome here on the couch, but then there's a car out here parked, and then you associate something kind of kinky with the car. I don't even remember if it was a car commercial or whatever. I just remember the image I have of that ad, and I noticed that, and I was like, hey, that's kind of weird. In the same way that sometimes you'll see these ads for cosmetics. Look sometime when you're in a really upscale cosmetic store, and you'll see some of these taboos. You'll see something saying, for a romantic encounter away from everyone, and then you'll notice that one hand, the man's hand, has no wedding ring, but the girl's hand has a wedding ring. What's the message there? Well, it's pretty obvious, but it's probably something that doesn't clobber you in the conscious mind any more than sometimes you'll see an ad in which there's two people in an embrace, and then you're looking kind of like, wait a minute, those are two women, and it's talking about a romantic evening. These are things that marketers know that is, well, it's taboo, but taboo sells because it grabs our attention subconsciously. And it doesn't matter if it's something that goes against whatever the moral principles of that person would be that's looking at it. It still gets them to react just the same as if you show a picture to someone who's a very, very, very conservative Christian or Jew or Muslim or whatever, and you show them a pornographic picture, their minds are going to react just the same way. In fact, some research would say even more so as a regular, I don't know, atheist or, hedonist or whatever. They're going to react. The human subconscious is going to react the same exact way. And the reason why I say sometimes even the more conservative person will react more is because it's even more of a taboo. So therefore, it kind of kicks the brain in the seat of the pants, so to speak. But, sex is everywhere in our ads. And then of course, that's based to a large degree on the concept of association. People have to make sure that they are associating. The advertising's trying to put one thing to another and associating it. Now, I remember one time there was a certain type of candy, and one of my favorite candies, and I had just gotten back from a long day of hiking and fishing up in the mountains of Oregon. And I was really hungry, but I had to stop at a regular store, not a restaurant, to get some things before I got home. And when I got in, I noticed there was like a half price sale on this particular type of candy that I really liked. So I grabbed some, and I was hungry, so I started eating. Well, the problem is, before I got home and could fix some regular meal, I got so sick to my stomach. But I could not eat those candies for about, I'd say 2 or 3 years. I could not touch that candy. Now, my mind was making an association with nausea to something that I normally liked very much. That's considered, it's operant conditioning, so to speak. And the thing is that the advertisers do this all the time with products that have nothing to do with each other, but they still elicit a response. Now, it can be negative or it can be positive. In politics, oh my gosh, you try your best to do negative. If you're attacking another candidate, you do your best to be positive if you're showing the virtues of your candidate. So everything, and a lot of people complain about that. They say American politics is turning more like, everything's either how saintly the person is or how evil they are. And people get this kind of sensory overload. Their mind's being confused. One minute they're thinking, well, candidate X, he or she seems to be a really nice person. But then the next commercial, it's like, well, candidate X is the most evil person on the face of the earth. They want to make your grandma into cookies or something like that, Soylent Green style. And so then your mind shot into, I cannot believe that this candidate's this way. And then the next commercial's like, hey, candidate X really wants to help your grandma and give her a break on her Medicaid or Medicare or whatever. And then, you're getting this back and forth and people just go crazy about it. But that is ultimately what advertising does. And, if we don't do that with products, it's almost like an unwritten rule that we don't show one brand of toothpaste against another and say, this brand of toothpaste over here totally sucks, but ours is really good. But yet our political campaigns, we do, pretty much that sort of thing. Now, the other thing that's kind of disturbing, though, about advertising, and this is one I'll give to the feminist, because I kind of ripped on some feminists earlier, and this time I'm going to say something good. And that is, often the advertisers want us to feel negative towards our bodies. They want us to feel bad about a certain, our complexion. They want us to be paranoid about, oh my gosh, you just walked up the stairs. Did you use the right deodorant? They want you to feel, constantly worried about how you are around someone. They want to make you feel less of a person. What would happen if advertising presented both men and women in their ideal form? And all ads were not creating some sort of impossible ideal, but just were saying, hey, use our product, it'll kind of help you here and reach your goals, and you showed regular people. I think we'd actually have a healthier population in many ways. I think we might actually even see a little bit less problems when it comes to obesity, because why even bother if you're never going to look like this particular 22-year-old model? Okay, if you're 45, you've had a lot of trouble getting the weight off after your third kid, and you work full time and all these other things, you may feel it's impossible to reach this ideal goal you see on TV all the time. So why bother? In fact, you might feel better about eating some comfort food. Now, the comfort food thing reminds me that there was once this article I read that said that, I think it was in a book actually, and it said that when they used to advertise a lot of cigarettes in magazines, they would intentionally place the cigarettes next to something that was dealing with health. Because, again, it was sort of like, goes into that concept of taboos I was telling you about, that if you have something that seems not to make sense, that the two are together, there's probably a reason the two are together that you don't understand, but your subconscious does. So like with weight loss, you put maybe a weight loss ad next to a article next to an ad selling cakes or something like that, and you'll probably get more cake sales because it creates tension. The news programs, you go on, you think about this for a minute. Regular American news, yes, we could say it's glitzy, it doesn't contain information, it's propagandistic, it's ultimately a huge waste of time to watch. But it's set up in a very good manner when it comes to selling things. Because what you do is you constantly emphasize all that's wrong in the world. This is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. These people just got swallowed by a tsunami or an earthquake or something like that. This politician just got caught doing this, and all these negative things. Oh, there's war in such and such place. Doesn't tell you why there's a war in such and such place or all the particulars about what other politicians are doing, but there's enough negative to fill the news. And then the commercials are always, oh my gosh, you could buy this product that'll relieve this problem or compensate for this deficiency. So ultimately, your commercials on TV want to be on news programs that are always emphasizing death, disease, destruction, and despair. Because the commercial then can be glitzy and wonderful and cute and, an over-the-rainbow sort of ideal. And you're more likely then, because you've just had your view of the world totally raked through the sewer, and now you're ready to buy a product that promises, at least in your life, this product will make your life better. I mean, that's just the way it works. And so ultimately what you want to do is you want to create confusion. You want to make sure that especially young women feel bad about their bodies, because then they'll go out and buy stuff. Young men, it works to a certain degree on them too, but there's quite a few men who realize that they don't have to look like a younger version of Brad Pitt in order to get dates. They don't have to be this supermodel ideal, but they ultimately are going to get judged on other factors to a large degree, whether it be their wealth or cleverness or any of these other ideals. So or some sort of materialism. And so guys are all stressed about owning the right car and having the right this or doing things just this way. Women are obsessed with, I've got to have a better looking body. I've got to do this and this and this. It sells. Whether it actually creates people that want to be ideal is a totally different matter. But ultimately it sells products. Okay? So you don't want people to wake up in the morning going, you know what? I don't need anything. In fact, I could just throw on some jeans and a t-shirt, and I'm already beautiful. Oh my gosh, if you had that ideal out there in society, that would do more damage to the fashion industry than if everyone's decided, hey, you know what? Let's just go naked all the time. Well, that would be the end of the fashion industry, wouldn't it? Well, maybe coats in the wintertime in the northern climates. But the thing is, you could never have that. So therefore, you've got to maintain this idea that you've got to make people feel negative about themselves, because they feel negative about themselves until they buy your product. They will feel better about the product. Now, when it comes to the materialism, I mean, it just seems to be getting more and more and more. And I'm wondering if that's, the economy since 2008 has been going more and more into the tank. I don't care what the government statistics show. That's like saying, if I have a room filled with people on food stamps and I bring in Bill Gates or George Soros or any of these kinds of people into the room and say, let's take a look at how much money everyone's earning per hour right now. Well, the people on welfare and stuff or food stamps, they're not working because they're in your room, so they're not making anything. But you might be thinking that one of these rich billionaire guys, well, they're earning money on just the interest alone in their bank accounts or on stocks or whatever. And then we divide it by the number of people in the room, and then we come out with, whoa, everyone's doing pretty good. Look at the figures here. That's how the government does it, okay? The economy is not getting better. And people may be getting more jobs, but the jobs are low-income, service-oriented jobs. And, I could look at, there's a million different areas we could look at to see this. But, isn't it ironic that there's more of these shows on now? I mean, my wife was watching this show about people buying wedding dresses and stuff like that. And they're listing prices on these products, and I'm going, wait a minute. Someone can afford that? I mean, this is this is more, I think, than a lot of people would pay for their car. But yet it sets an ideal. And so people feel bad later that they can't afford that. So, what does that do to depression? And I'm going to continue with this show later on. I just noticed we're up for time now. But ultimately, try to become more aware of the manipulation that's going on around you. Okay? That will take away the power of the media. The more you become sensitive to this, the less power it will have over you. And if you could teach this within your kids, or if you're older, your grandkids, you'll have more success in keeping them in the same values that you want them to have than just teaching them and then letting them be at the mercy of this massive media industry today. The thing is that I think one of the things we need to look at in this election cycle, first of all, is that selling a product is, if you could sell products, if you could, for instance, sell soap, all right? Because they did this marketing in the 50s, and they wanted to figure out a way to sell soap. So they wanted to find out what soap meant to women. And they did the focus groups. They found out that, the bathroom in the bathtub was one of the few times the woman could feel like she had some privacy away from everyone and everything. And, doors locked, even if the kids knock on the door, they're still able to, escape. And, they then realized that if they associated soap with like taking a guilty pleasure and using words that were more sensuous in the ad, that they'd make more sales. Now, if this is how you can successfully sell products, then it's also true that you can successfully sell ideas or even candidates. There's one thing I thought was kind of funny. During the election when it came to Mitt Romney, there was a lot of people who were making fun of his being Mormon. And there was a lot of stuff, not in the main press really so much, although there was some, but in social media, with the whole polygamy thing and stuff like that. And I think if I had been advising Mitt Romney when he was running for office on how he could actually maximize what could be perceived as a negative in the campaign, what I would have done if I was Mitt Romney is I'd have made sure there was a group of women, attractive young women behind Mitt Romney, in the background. You know how they do those staged political things nowadays. There's always people in the background and in kind of an audience watching your back as you speak, which kind of conveys the idea that they're part of your force or army of supporters and so forth. Well, I would have actually had like I said, I had a group of young women behind Mitt Romney when he was giving his speeches. Now you're saying, well, wait a minute, wouldn't that just reinforce the idea? In a way, but it'd be at the subconscious level, which would also mean that there was more virility associated with this candidate. You do remember that Bill Clinton's support amongst men when the whole Monica Lewinsky thing broke in the 90s decreased. His support amongst women increased. You're going, what? How can that be? Well, if you're going to go by psychology, it was that Bill Clinton was available. I mean, he's like a rock star. A lot of rock stars would make up stories about all these wild parties and stuff like this they'd have with groupies after a show. And yes, there were a lot of rock stars that did that kind of thing, but there was others that just made sure they maintained the image. And that would play well amongst their fans. And you're thinking, well, that just doesn't make sense. Well, like I said, his popularity went up. Bill Clinton's. All right? Now you explain that. I don't think if their husbands, more close to home and not in the fantasy of the subconscious, I don't think if their husbands came home and said, hey, honey, I did some Clinton sex with someone at work. I don't know if they'd have been their wives have been very happy with them. But in the subconscious world, Clinton showed a certain virility and availability as the chief, of the tribe. Now, if you want to look at something a little further ahead, I remember that when they showed those pictures of John McCain, when he was pictured with Sarah Palin, his popularity went up. Okay? That's why the Democrats had to really concentrate on attacking Sarah Palin. Because regardless of whatever qualifications Sarah Palin had, when you saw the two together, subconsciously, when you see a man and woman together, it's just like when you watch a TV show and they show one of the actors and one of the actresses, looking at each other a certain way or just spending a lot of time together. There's going to be this romance undertone. Whether it happens or not, it's still going to be a subplot that it could happen. And I think it made McCain look much younger. I showed a group of people the picture of McCain and Palin, and then just a picture of McCain, and they all said that it made it look as if he and Sarah were a couple, and that conveyed a youthfulness to McCain, which of course he needed in that particular instance. So ultimately, we've got to remember, again, the subconscious rules, and we need to try to figure out what it is that we can appeal to people in political campaigns, just like the marketers do when they try to appeal to us in their trying to sell us products. Anyway, now I see the time's up here. So again, thank you for tuning in, and hope to catch you next week here on Unlock the Door Radio at UCY TV Productions.
is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY